Welcome back to the Marvel Podcast for gifted listeners. I do want to apologize for the month hiatus. March was just a very busy month with my professional life, and also my birthday was this month, so I took that day off from working on the podcast. Also, this episode was a lot. Matt Murdock has a lot of issues, and navigating them all through the comics was pretty tricky. So, now what do you know about the man without fear, the devil of Hell's Kitchen, the blind lawyer, the good Irish Catholic? Do you just know him from the Netflix series? Or did you actually read his comics? If you've just seen the Netflix shows, you may know he's blind, fights Kingpin, and goes to church a lot. And comics, you might know some of the stories, but not all of them. And I'm here to let you know about pretty much all of them. And if you want to know any specific issues or storylines, you can always send email to tmpfgl@gmail.com. The email will be at the end of the episode and in the episode description. And a disclaimer for this episode, there is going to be talks of suicide and other dark topics. And with that, let's go into the timeline of Matt Murdock's life. Matt Murdock was the child of a pretty well-known boxer known as Battling Jack Murdock. And his mother was Maggie Murdock, who she was believed to be dead for the longest time in the comics. At least that's what Matt knew. And because of her death, Jack vowed that Matt would never have to solve anything with his fists. And so he didn't. Matt would basically be inside all day and night studying so that he could get a good position so that he wouldn't have to go into boxing like his father. And because of this, the school kids actually would make fun of him and call him Daredevil because, look, the kid inside, he's so crazy, so much of a daredevil. And he would actually take this and use it for his superhero name years later. Well, there's that fateful day that gave Matt his abilities. He was walking down the street, and he saw a blind man crossing the road. And he jumped in the way, pushed the blind man out of the way from getting hit by a truck. But, unbeknownst to Matt, that truck was carrying toxic and radioactive material. And this splashed in his eyes, blinding him, but erased all his other senses. And unfortunately, that saving that man did have dark consequences for that man's daughter. He would go on to molest her, and after she killed her father, she would go on to become a serial killer that Matt would eventually stop as Daredevil. But moving on from that, Matt would secretly train at his father's gym while he was away before he was blinded. After he was blinded, he would use this gym to hone his skills and abilities. And then, shortly after, a man named Stick would find him. Stick would be a member of Chaste, which is a organization against the Hand, which is one of Matt's main antagonists throughout the series. While Matt was in law school, he scored tickets to one of his father's last fights. Well, actually, it would be his last fight. And his father's last fight, he was supposed to throw the fight. But Jack decided to go for the knockout because he wanted his son to see him win. And this was actually against the bookie, the fixer, who had been setting up Jack's fights. Jack was supposed to take the fall, and all the money would have went to the fixer, but behind the fixer's back, Jack actually placed a bet on himself so that Matt would have some money to help him in life. In college, Matt would meet Elektra Nachios, and it would be love at first, quote-unquote, sight. But after her father dies, she retreats from the world and Matt. And they would not see each other for some years. Matt would go on to graduate valedictorian from his law school, and with his best friend from college, he would set up Nelson and Murdoch. And they would hire Karen Page as a secretary. After graduating, Matt decides that he is going to go out and find the person who killed his father. And that would be the Fixer. And for Daredevil's first costume, he actually took his father's old boxing robes and made them into the very first costume. He would track down the Fixer and the men who killed his father and beat them severely and get them arrested. The police actually didn't mind Daredevil. They were like, oh, hey, good job, my guy. There wasn't that inherent hatred like there was for Spider-Man when he first came on scene. And also Matt's first, weapon that he used was his cane that looked like a normal cane for the time. And it had a secret compartment so that it could split into two and be used like his billy clubs that would become his famous weapon down the road. Daredevil and Spider-Man, their rogues galleries cross over a lot, so you'll see a lot of villains that are known as Spider-Man villains in Daredevil stories. We're actually one of the first supervillains that Matt fights is Electro. And it kind of sucks that he had to fight Electro because the Fantastic Four actually hired Matt as a lawyer so that he could audit the Baxter building for tax purposes and whatever. But when Matt gets there, Electro's broken in, and Matt winds up getting put into the Fantastic Four's rocket. It launches, and some of the crazy early comic stuff of, hey, a blind man can fly a rocket because he can hear and sense the electricity buzzing throughout the control panel. But he winds up landing the rocket, stopping Electro. But because of all this, he never actually does the audit, and he loses the Fantastic Four as clients. Which is something that kind of happens a lot with Matt of losing clients because he has to do Daredevil stuff. One of Matt's earliest villains, the Masked Marauder. The Masked Marauder had this technology that he would blast people in the eyes and he would temporarily blind them. He wanted to basically set up Daredevil and Spider-Man against each other because he was like, oh, if they're too busy fighting each other, no one can stop me. So he sends out decoys of Daredevil in Daredevil outfits to harass Spider-Man. Well, by the time the real Daredevil shows up, Peter's pissed because Daredevil, who he thought was a friend, has been attacking him. So they, Peter and Matt actually fight for a bit, but Daredevil winds up getting away because he really doesn't want to fight Spider-Man. And also he did wind up beating Peter. The crazy thing about Matt's super senses is that they are near the level of Peter's Spider Sense, if not better sometimes. Well, after this, Peter uses his Spider Sense to find out that that Daredevil is at Nelson and Murdoch. And he sees Karen Page, Foggy Nelson, and Matt Murdock. He assumes Foggy is Daredevil because how could a blind man be Daredevil? And clearly Daredevil's a man. So, process elimination. Well, so now, Masked Marauder broke into Nelson and Murdoch. Spidey and Daredevil beat him. Karen now believes that Foggy is Daredevil, and Foggy doesn't deny it. But the Masked Marauder does now think that Foggy is Daredevil. And this starts kind of the weird kind of stuff with Matt's identity crisis that follows him all throughout the rest of, not the rest, but most of his comic run. So, after this whole incident, And when the Marauders' optic blast didn't work on Daredevil in the final fight with Spidey, Daredevil, and the Masked Marauder, Peter kind of figures out that, oh, Matt is Daredevil. So he sends a letter to Nelson and Murdoch just being like, hey, I know who you are. But instead of Matt just fessing up that, hey, yes, I am Daredevil to his two best friends, because they had intercepted the letter, he made up this convoluted scheme that, oh, no, I'm not Daredevil. That's my twin brother, Mike Murdoch. And so now Matt has to be Matt Murdoch, Mike Murdoch, and Daredevil. Which is crazy because Mike can see. And, yeah. And actually, funny enough, in episode 2 of the original Netflix show, when Claire asked Matt what his name was, he told her it was Mike. So just a little nod to the comics there. So later on, there was a group known as the Unholy Three. And he had a whip that he would crack that could basically send people 5 seconds off of time. So like they would disappear and they'd be this weird like time displacement. But because of Matt's senses, he was able to figure out when the whip was cracked and kind of get into the way of it and get back to present day. It was a weird time travel mechanic thing of the 70s that, again, comics in the 70s were very weird. Very hard to explain the physics of that stuff. Well, once Matt gets back to present day, he tracks down the Unholy Three, and in their hideout, Matt blows up a machine, and he escapes, but he leaves part of the Daredevil costume behind to basically make it seem like Mike and Daredevil have both died, just to kind of get out of this hole he kind of put himself in. Well, after this, Foggy starts to run for the district attorney. But the current mayor of New York City does not want Foggy to be the district attorney because he believes that he will not be able to manhandle Foggy like he could any other sort of DA that might be in. So the mayor hires the Jester to kidnap Foggy until Foggy agrees to drop out of the race. And this causes problems now because it's like, oh no, Mike and Daredevil are now dead. Who's going to save Foggy? And Matt, with all his genius, says, oh, no. My brother Mike, he actually trained a new Daredevil before he died. And so now Daredevil is back. So as Daredevil, he goes and he rescues Foggy. And now his identity is now concealed again. And he doesn't have to keep up the whole Mike charade. After this, Matt and Karen, they've had feelings for each other pretty much since the first issue. It was actually kind of crazy. Most of Karen's thought bubbles for the first bit of his comic run was, oh, if only Matt would notice that I truly have feelings for him. I'd marry him in an instant, even though he's blind. And that was like her whole thing for the beginning part of her run before she left. Matt was going to propose to her, but then realized that he can't because of Daredevil. So he winds up driving her away. While dealing with his inner turmoil, he is out being Daredevil and gets exposed to radium. And for whatever weird reason, radium makes him temporarily insane. And during this, he sees an ad for an exhibition fight between Captain America and just some other guy. But in his insanity, Matt's like, no, like, Captain America's a fraud. He shouldn't be fighting this dude. I'm going to go fight him because he deserves a real fight. And he hops in the ring and just starts trying to beat the shit out of Captain America. And Cap actually will hold back for a bit till he realizes that, oh, Daredevil is not messing around. And so they start exchanging actual blows. And then the radium wears off, and Matt goes, and he runs away. And when he runs away, he just runs away because he's like, it will be too weird to try to explain this Captain America. And that was kind of the end of that story. So after this, Foggy does actually wind up going on to be the district attorney. And Matt now needs to figure out what his future in law is going to be like, because there is no more Nelson and Murdoch. Because Foggy's gone, Karen's gone. After this, without Foggy and Karen, he just doesn't want to be Daredevil anymore. He's sick of it, he sees that it's caused him to lose his friends. But then one of his rogues, Biggie Benson, sends an android after Matt. And after Matt fights it, Matt ultimately decides that, okay, I'm Daredevil and Daredevil is me. Soon later, Karen leaves for California, and Matt would follow. But while in California, Matt and actually Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, would get together. The only problem was this was not a great relationship, because Matt would constantly be watching out for Black Widow and trying to save her, when clearly Black Widow can handle herself. So it became awkward. Just the relationship wasn't good because Matt was always worried about Black Widow, and Black Widow was like, I'm not helpless. Could you stop? Well, the two had been in a fight, and Matt finds out that Foggy was shot. And because they were in the middle of a fight, Matt left to leave back to New York, and it was basically Black Widow being like, all right, don't let the door hit you on the way out. And so, yeah, that ended Matt's relationship with the Black Widow. Matt gets back to New York, and Foggy recovers. Now, Matt will start dating Heather Glenn, which she actually has appeared in Daredevil Born Again. I'm a little behind on the show, so I'm not sure what her fate will be in the show. But in the comics, her and Matt do date, and she is the daughter of Maxwell Glenn, and he would actually fund a practice for Matt and Foggy. So Nelson and Murdoch Part 2. And they would then take on the cases of the poor, similar to how they ran Nelson and Murdoch in the beginning of the Netflix show. Well, the Purple Man winds up making Maxwell kill himself, and then Heather has to run the company that her father is running. The company winds up getting run kind of into the ground, and then she develops a heavy drinking problem. She knows Matt is Daredevil, and while she's drunk, she would actually blurt out that Matt's Daredevil and just be all kind of sloppy, and Matt was really not having this. So he broke up with her, but she still wanted his attention. Then one night she calls him, and she's like, Matt, I need you here, Matt. And he's like, Heather, it's going to be an hour till I can get there because I live across town, taking transportation. I'm blind. But she goes, oh, well, Daredevil could get here quickly. So he changes and gets across the city in 15 minutes. When he gets there, she basically has nothing of substance. She's just like, Matt, I miss you. Why aren't you with me anymore? And Matt's like, you can't keep doing this. So he leaves, and the next day she would call him. He picked up the first time, but then was like, leave me alone. You have a problem. Stop calling me. And she would go on to call him 18 more times, and he just ignored her. Well, she gets a hold of Foggy, and Foggy goes over there. And then Foggy calls Matt. And when Matt gets there, he sees her hanging. She did wind up killing herself. Well, after this, Matt has another mental breakdown and questions himself. But he does kind of put himself back together. He then would go on to rescue a woman named Gloria O'Brien from the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, which is a group that they were a terrorist group in Ireland, followed her to America because she had information on some people that had been killed. Matt would go on to stop him, and him and Gloria would soon wind up dating. On Christmas, Micah Sin, a savage man who's the direct descendant of an 18th century English settler, breaks into Matt Murdock's house after he had shown up at Debbie Nelson's house and gave her a present and then tried to force himself on her. She gets away and Kingpin tells him to leave her alone. But he doesn't do this, tracks her to Foggy's house where Foggy, Gloria, Debbie, and Matt are all having a Christmas party. While they start beating up everyone, including Matt kind of plays dumb and gets himself to be pushed into the Christmas tree. And when he does this, he's able to kill the lights. With the lights out, he's able to quickly switch into his Daredevil uniform and fight Sin. Fights him into the back alley. But during this fight, Sin actually gets the upper hand on Daredevil. But then, Kingpin shows up and beats down Sin. And the reason for this is because he told him not to go after Debbie, to leave that woman alone. Daredevil thanks Kingpin, and Kingpin just tells him, "Merry Christmas, Daredevil." During all this time, when Matt is in New York being Daredevil, Karen Page has been in Los Angeles. She went out there to become an actress, but life doesn't always work out that way. So Karen actually winds up becoming a porn star. And while in the industry, she tries heroin once, and then she becomes a heroin addict. She winds up selling Matt's secret identity to someone to get her next fix. The person that she sold that to then sells it to Kingpin, and Kingpin just destroys Matt's life. He gets him disbarred, he blows up his house, and then tries to kill Daredevil. And after he tried to kill him, what happened was he beat Matt to near death, put him in a cab, and threw him in the river. And this is what would lead to the Born Again storyline, which, even though the new Disney Plus show takes that name, is not the same story. The story actually gets played out in season 3 of the Netflix show. And so Matt wakes up after all this in a Catholic mission where Sister Maggie is taking care of him. Matt does realize that this woman is his mother because of a gold cross that she wears that he remembers from when he was a child. She would nurse him back to health, and he does get out into the world and becomes Daredevil again. But Kingpin, still set to discredit Daredevil, goes to the tailor who has made Daredevil's costumes and tells him, "I need you to make this costume or your family's going to die." And the costume maker, he was very hesitant about it because he didn't want Daredevil's name to be besmirched. And then, when he's having this crisis, Matt shows up in the shadows and says, "Just make the costume, and can you get me one too?" And so Matt, now back in action, stops the fake Daredevil and saves Karen, and the two wind up reuniting. They are a little, shaken up, but they are back together, and he does forgive her for what happened. Well, now, Kingpin, after this failed attempt to kill Matt, Kingpin finally gets a hold of Nuke, who was a super soldier who feeds on adrenaline. He actually has placebo pills to make him think that if he takes one, his adrenaline goes up. If he takes another, his adrenaline goes down. and then the other will bring him back to his baseline. Well, Nuke is a little crazy. He goes to Hell's Kitchen and just starts obliterating it, like launching rockets, shooting up stores, whatever you can do to try to kill Matt. But Matt winds up avoiding all this, and actually the Avengers come in to take down Nuke because he's a madman. And actually Captain America is the one to stop him and actually makes him feel like shit because, Cap is the original super soldier. This guy, Cap makes him feel terrible. And because of this, Matt actually gets a hold of Nuke and brings him to the Daily Bugle. And at the Daily Bugle, Nuke tells all and says that it was Kingpin that hired him to do this. So now the Bugle writes a slander piece, and now Kingpin hates Matt even more. So Kingpin has to come up with a new way to ruin Matt's life. And he gets Typhoid Mary to make Matt fall in love with her. She does this, and then Matt cheats on Karen with her. And this leads to yet another mental breakdown for Daredevil. During this specific breakdown, Matt actually winds up in hell and confronts Mephisto. And after this encounter, Matt returns to New York, but he has amnesia. So bad that he doesn't even remember that he is blind. And he goes on to take up the identity of Jack Murdoch and becomes a blind boxer. And during this time, Bullseye would actually be wearing Daredevil's costume trying to ruin Matt's life. But Bullseye would actually wind up having his own mental breakdown and believe that he is Daredevil and would go on to fight crime as Daredevil even though he is Bullseye. Eventually, Matt gets enough of his memory back to remember, oh, I'm Daredevil. And he would actually go and find one of Bullseye's old costumes and go fight Bullseye, who's dressed as Daredevil dressed as Bullseye. The two would fight, and Matt would win. And now he has to go on to restore his Daredevil reputation. After this, Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, would go on to create a media empire. And using his own media, he would push his own views, such as, oh, Daredevil's terrible. But Nick Fury would let Matt know that the money that funded Fisk's media empire came from Hydra. So, as Daredevil, he coaxes Kingpin into a public rampage. And after this public rampage, he outs Kingpin of using Hydra money to make his media empire, and this would cause Kingpin to be stripped of all his resources. This whole time, Matt has been disbarred because of Kingpin's meddling, but after he assists federal prosecutor Kathy Mapler, he does get his legal license back. Well, now you know how I said that Spidey and Daredevil have a lot of crossover? Well, this time it's Mysterio who decides to meddle with Matt's life. And even though he doesn't need much help for a mental breakdown, Mysterio torments Matt until he gets yet another mental breakdown. Mysterio would use his illusions and stuff to make Matt think that a newborn baby was the second coming of Christ, but also the Antichrist. And while he has this child, Matt would be exposed to a toxin that would make him go crazy, and if anybody believed that the child was innocent, he would attack them. And also during this, he would frame Foggy for murder and make Karen believe she had AIDS. The only thing that was able to remove the toxins from his system was Doctor Strange and magic. After Matt was cured, he rushed to the mission where his mother was, but Bullseye had attacked and hurt all the nuns there, and Bullseye would kill Karen Page at this moment. Bullseye then kidnaps the baby, and when Daredevil hunted him down, that's when he learned of Mysterio doing all this. And when Matt finally breaks through all of Mysterio's illusions, He dismisses Beck as an unoriginal villain with a lame scheme. And this causes Mysterio to have his own mental breakdown and shoot himself. After this, Spidey would help Matt realize that the baby represented something positive, and when the baby was adopted, Matt suggested that she be named Karen, in honor of his late friend and lover. Using the money that Karen had left for him with her life insurance, he restarred Nelson Murdoch. Again, for a third time. Nelson Murdoch really came and went a lot. At one point after this establishment, Matt would beat Kingpin once and for all, and he would become the new Kingpin of Hell's Kitchen, but he wouldn't rule it like Fisk did. He would basically be so fearful that there would be no crime committed in Hell's Kitchen because everyone feared the Kingpin so much. After helping with a raft breakout, the same one that Luke Cage helped out with, the new Avengers offered Matt a position, but because Daredevil has such a poor public image, he refuses because he didn't want to bring down the reputation of the new Avengers. In another sad moment for Foggy, he would be shot and killed, and this would lead Matt to go to Europe to find out who did it. While in Switzerland, he finds out that it was Vanessa Fisk, and also Vanessa had just killed her own son, and she blamed Daredevil for her actions. Well, to help Matt, but also not help Matt, to get revenge, she said she wanted Matt to be corrupted and represent Wilson Fisk in court to get him free. And if she did this, then Matt's identity as Daredevil, which had been leaked, would just go away. But even though Matt refuses, the plan was already set into motion. Matt reluctantly does represent Wilson in court, but in a bit of petty revenge, he draws out the trial long enough so that Wilson Fisk cannot attend Vanessa's funeral. After Vanessa does pass away, it's revealed that Foggy is alive and was just part of FBI protection. Now, Nelson Murdoch would reopen, but they would move from a new building and they would go on a referral-only basis so that people couldn't hunt down their base, or hunt down their law office. Well, now Matt has a new love interest. Milia. She is a blind woman who Matt had met during some Nelson Murdoch business. A old law school rival of Matt's, who is now known as Mr. Fear, poisoned Milia with a psychedelic drug. This psychedelic drug would wind her up in a psych ward. And because Matt has grief over basically him being his fault that she wound up in this ward, he would get drunk one night and sleep with Dakota North, a member of the Nelson Murdoch team who was acting as security for Nelson Murdoch. Well, now Lady Bullseye gets a picture of this and presents it to Mila's parents. They now gain custody of her because it's like, oh, Matt's cheating. And so after this, Matt signs divorce papers to end the relationship. Well, now the Hand is back to mess with Matt's life even more. Master Izo, who before Stick targeted Matt in the war against the Hand, believed that Matt would lead the Hand back to the light or destroy them for good. And Lady Bullseye believes that she should have been the one in Matt's position. Well, desperate to stop this, stop Master Izo and the Hand, Matt would actually team up with Kingpin. Sick of Matt's erratic behavior, Foggy actually fires Matt from Nelson Murdoch. Then, after this, Kingpin would betray Matt, and Matt would have to fight Lady Bullseye. After he beats Lady Bullseye, he becomes the leader of the Hand. And now he's not teamed up with Kingpin or Lady Bullseye at all. Well, Kingpin and Lady Bullseye, they keep an alliance. Kingpin sends Lady Bullseye to kill two of Norman Osborn's associates. And for revenge, Norman sends the original Bullseye to attack Matt. Bullseye lures Matt to a building of Oscorp employees' families, and the original Bullseye will wind up blowing up the building and killing like everyone in the building but Matt. This causes Matt to snap just a little bit. Again, like, the amount of mental breaks this man has had throughout his comic run is honestly insane. Almost as bad as Hank Pym. Well, he goes to Japan, where the Hand is from, and he will actually unite the 5 warlords of the Hand under one unified leader, being him. And now he returns to New York City with the Hand, and on the rubble of that building that was destroyed by the original Bullseye, he would create a fortress, and this would be called Shadowland, which he would don a black costume with red D's, which, from leaks of Daredevil Season 2, might be happening in the show. Just the costume looks almost identical to what you see in the comics. While he is riding Shadowland, Snakeroot, which is a shadow part of the Hand, would manipulate Daredevil into the Black Flower Ritual. During this manipulation, Matt would actually wind up killing Bullseye with a Psy, and this is the last part of a ritual to get him possessed by the Beast. The Beast is Lucifer, Azazel, is the devil, essentially. And this throws Hell's Kitchen into just a violent chaos. And the only way that Matt actually gets cured is Iron Fist basically punches him with the Chi attack and restores his soul to its former glory. After this, Matt quits being Daredevil again because he realizes the trouble he has caused. Matt will now move to New Mexico, mainly just because he doesn't think he's ever done anything good as Daredevil. He's just so broken because of all this. But while in New Mexico, there are residents who are being harassed by a drug lord, and this makes Matt confront his fears of being a shady person and restores his sense of being the man without fear, the Daredevil. And then he moves back to New York. While back in New York, the first case he takes on is about a Muslim store owner who is suffering from police brutality. Well, because of this and their link to Daredevil, there's a whole media circus. And so instead of just straight up representing people in court, Nelson and Murdoch are now going to be coaching clients on how to represent themselves. Well, now the whole thing of Matt as Daredevil is being more and more scrutinized, and people are like, oh, is he not? And at the time, Foggy actually has cancer. The health insurance provided by Nelson and Murdoch is keeping him alive, keeping him with his chemo treatment. But Matt goes to Foggy and says, hey, this is a crazy plan I have. The only way to really help us is if I tell everybody that I am Daredevil. And Foggy tells him, you're one of the most morally good men that I know. And the day that I stop thinking that is the day I'll be dead. So yes, even though I may lose my health insurance and not be able to afford my cancer treatment anymore, I think this is the right thing to do. And so, in court, Matt reveals, I am Daredevil. Meanwhile, the judge, who is part of the Serpent Society, is about to be killed because of his role in this whole court case. That's when a hitman breaks in, and Matt springs into action, ripping open his shirt, revealing the Daredevil costume, and fighting and saving the judge. But the judge does wind up going to prison because of this. Well, because of this revelation that Matt is Daredevil, the New York State Supreme Court has a meeting about do they disbar Foggy Nelson and Matt Murdock? And even though the judges recognize how much good Daredevil has done, and they owe a debt of gratitude to Matt and Daredevil, it is an ethics violation because of the way Matt would do cases. And they do vote, and both Matt and Foggy are disbarred. Well, at the time, the assistant DA, Kirsten McDuffie, her and Matt had like this weird on again, off again thing. And Matt reveals his feelings for her. And she tells him, hey, you can't practice law in New York, but the easiest way to get a new legal license to be rebarred is to go to somewhere where you've practiced before. And since he has practiced law in San Francisco before, they moved to San Francisco. While in San Francisco, Matt gives up his dual identity as Daredevil. And a villain named Shroud would use surveillance tech to showcase the worst aspects of Matt's life to ruin his reputation. Because, that's what you gotta do. Just ruin Matt Murdock's life. I think the only other person whose life gets more messed up is Peter Parker's, but that's more the Marvel writers than it is the characters in the story. To fix his reputation, Matt would team up with Fisk, but then Fisk would double-cross him. After this double-crossing, though, Matt would use the same technology that was used to diminish his reputation and basically broadcast Kingpin's crimes to the world. And this winds up sending Kingpin to jail. And then after this, Matt is able to clear his name. While in San Francisco, Typhoid Mary does attack Matt and Kirsten, and Matt wound up stopping practicing law because of, the Daredevil aspect of his life. So the couple decide to return home to New York City. When they return, Matt continues fighting as Daredevil, even though he cannot practice law. Matt does have a deal for an autobiography, but because of this autobiography, he can't really be Daredevil that well because people are thinking that, as Daredevil, he is only fighting to basically pad his book. So he gives up the autobiography, and then Matt and Kirsten would go back to San Francisco. While in San Francisco, the Purple Children, who are the Purple Man's kids, would use their powers to make everyone forget that he is Daredevil. Now that Kirsten no longer knows that he is Daredevil, he actually returns home at one point as Daredevil, and she goes, Matt's not here. Realizing that he cannot put her life in danger now that his identity is secret again, he ends things with her. And she's actually super pissed about this. She kicks him out, and as he's leaving, she basically shouts, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." And so now Matt returns back to the good old Big Apple. After this breakup, Matt would work in New York to legitimize superheroes in the eyes of the law. So basically, if they're fighting, superheroes can be used to be admissible in court and stuff like that. And he was on the right track until Wilson Fisk became mayor. And while he was mayor, he initiated his anti-vigilante rhetoric, which I believe we might see play out in the Disney Plus series. Again, I think I've only seen the first 3 episodes at this point, so I'm not sure. But Matt would become deputy mayor to try to fight Fisk from the inside out because he has not been making headway fighting him as Daredevil from the outside. Well, the Hand was out in New York City and leave Fisk injured. Matt was able to handle the Hand's assault with assistance from Blindspot, another blind vigilante. But Blindspot would wind up falling victim to and becoming a puppet of the Beast. But after he's able to defeat the Hand, Matt leaves his position as deputy mayor believing that he can beat Fisk from the outside rather than the inside. Matt would have a near-death experience as fighting as Daredevil, because after years of fighting as Daredevil, he gets injured and he actually winds up being crippled and psychologically damaged again. So he gives up being Daredevil for a bit. After giving up on his recovery and overcoming his fears, Matt returns to being Daredevil. But because of his injuries, he's fighting harder, and he would go on to accidentally kill someone, or so he thought. It did seem like the person didn't actually die, but according to all records, he did die. This eventually caught up to Matt, and he would go to jail as Daredevil, and he was able to keep his mask on in prison, because it was Daredevil who did the crime, not Matt. There was a guard who his son was put away by Daredevil, so that guard put a bounty on Daredevil. And basically, if an inmate was able to successfully take out Daredevil, they would get preferential treatment. And in jail, they would poison him, beat him, put him in solitary confinement, whatever they could do. Well, Matt is finding out that some prisoners have died recently from a mysterious cause, and he becomes an FBI informant to find out why. He eventually discovers that a deadly agent had been being produced in a lab below the prison, and so he uses this to, now that he has this information, he breaks free, went to the FBI, turned in his findings. But instead of staying a free man, he did return to jail to finish his sentence because he believed it was the right thing to do. Once Matt was free, he would train with Elektra, who would help him become his old self again. After this training, the two would both work together as Daredevil, both adopting the name Daredevil. And now they would reform the Fist, the anti-hand group. Members would include Stick, Foggy, Blindspot, and Elektra. Foggy and Stick at one point would be possessed by the Beast, and would attack Daredevil as kind of like these undead corpses. And also, the President would be taken over by this entity. In a ritual to end the Beast once and for all, Matt kills himself during this ritual and goes straight to hell to fight the Beast. After fighting the Beast in hell, Matt releases the souls of Foggy, Stick, and the U.S. President. And Matt would seemingly stay in hell. But last we knew in the comics, he was reborn as a priest, amnesiac priest. And that's what we know he's been living his life as right now. And Elektra currently has the mantle of Daredevil. So, we'll have to see what happens next for Matt Murdock, the man without fear, the devil of Hell's Kitchen. So, now let's look at the top 5 things we learned in today's episode. Number 1. Matt Murdock was blinded at age 15 when he pushed a man out of the way of a truck carrying radioactive material and was blinded. Number 2. He would be trained by Stick, another blind man who had been working for the Hand, and he would mentor him and train him to eventually take over and become leader of the Fist, a force for good. But that didn't work out exactly how it was planned. Number 3. Matt would adopt the Daredevil moniker after his father was killed, and he wanted to find out who had done it, using his father's old boxing robes as his very first costume. Number 4. Matt had worked for and ran many law practices, but would eventually be disbarred after he had revealed his secret identity as Daredevil. And number 5. Matt, who's a very Catholic man, this part of him would play into his story many times. And one of his last known fights was him in hell fighting the Beast, who has been called Lucifer. So very fitting for a Catholic man to be part of that fight. So, all in all, Matt Murdock was a complicated character with many, many mental breakdowns. identity crises, love interests. And I think the Netflix show did a great job of adapting many of these storylines. Like, I had seen the show, and I actually would watch episodes as I was doing this research. And just as I'm doing the research, I'd be like, oh, hey, look at that, like the reference to Mike Murdock in episode 2. And it seems like Daredevil Born Again will continue to pull from the comics and actually adapt these stories pretty well. Like I said in the beginning of the episode, if you'd like to hear more in-depth details about certain storylines or some side characters, you can always email me at tmpfgl@gmail.com. In our next episode, we're going to look at the rights battles of Marvel that have been raging since the 90s, when New Line Cinema got the rights to Blade. And even though these rights battles are almost over, there's still a few companies holding out. So you'll have to tune in next time to find out who and why. This episode was written, recorded, and edited by myself, James Bazinski. Intro music sourced from freesound.org. You can find us on Instagram at tmpfgl, TikTok at the same handle of tmpfgl, on YouTube at the Marvel Podcast for Gifted Listeners. And like I've said, any questions or suggestions can be emailed to tmpfgl@gmail.com. Please like, subscribe, and rate the show wherever you listen. Until next time, gifted listeners, thank you for listening, and Excelsior!